Picture a CEO colder than a winter night, a man who turns people into profit margins and dreams into data points. Michael Turner was that mana fortress of ice in a tailored suit, ruling his corporate kingdom with spreadsheets as his only allies. His world was one of numbers and neglect, where emotions were as welcome as a paper cut at a keyboard convention. Then came Charlotte Miller, his new assistant, who burst into his office like a tornado of sunshine. Armed with cheesy jokes, a cookie jar labeled emergency snacks, and a terminal illness diagnosis she kept locked in her desk drawer, Charlotte was on a mission to live her bucket list journey with every ounce of her being. Overworked and underwhelmed by life's drab routine, Michael found himself torn between firing her and letting her chaotic charisma thaw his frozen heart. But when he accidentally discovered her secreta terminal illness and a love with a deadline, Lister became her silent guardian, fulfilling her dreams one by one. Now ask yourself, can a man who's spent his life avoiding curves ever learn to dance? Can terminal illness become a catalyst for transformation? And just how much joy can one person squeeze into a life measured in months? Let's explore a story where the greatest twist isn't in the plot, but in the heart of a CEO who finally learns that legacy isn't built in boardrooms, but in the moments you live fully, even when time is ticking. Michael Turner, the CEO of Titan Industries, had always prided himself on being a man of precision and ice. His office, a austere sanctuary of glass and steel, reflected his personality, rigid, impersonal, and devoid of warmth. The only sounds were the rhythmic clacking of keyboards and the occasional sigh of frustration from overworked employees. That is, until Charlotte Miller walked in. "Mr. Turner," she announced with a grin so bright it could have powered the company's servers. "I'm here to make your life easier and a little more fun." Michael blinked, his tie tightening around his collar as he scrutinized her. Her resume was impeccable, but her demeanor was perplexing. She bounced into the room like a human ray of sunshine, clutching a mug labeled "Happiness is a Choice," and humming a tune that made his teeth ache. "You were hired for your organizational skills, not your enthusiasm," Michael muttered, crossing his arms. Charlotte merely laughed, a sound like wind chimes on a breezy day. "Oh, don't worry. It'll keep the chaos to a minimum, but a little joy never hurt anyone, right?" She plopped a stack of color-coded folders on his desk, each labeled with cheerful stickers. Michael's eyebrow twitched. This was not what he'd bargained for. The first week was a minefield. Charlotte rearranged his meticulously ordered desk into a more inviting setup, complete with a succulent plant. "It's low maintenance, I swear," and a playlist of focus beats that made his head spin. When he demanded she remove the plant, she'd redirected. "With a smile, sir. Would you prefer a cactus instead? Symbolizes resilience." Resilience, he thought grimly, was the last trait he needed in an assistant or a cactus. By Friday, Michael's patience was fraying, yet, as he glanced at Charlotte's Desno, a hub of laughter and impromptu team snacks, he couldn't help but notice something strange. The office felt lighter. Was that employee Ryan actually smiling at Sarah in accounting? And why did the coffee smell better today? Michael shook his head. This was temporary. Professionals didn't need cheerleaders. Or did they? From the get-go, Charlotte's vibrant energy was like a pebble dropped in Michael's perfectly still pond. She'd saunter into the office at 7:30 a.m., blasting "Don't Stop Me Now" on her wireless speaker. Research says music boosts productivity. She'd argue when Michael's glare could have frozen a flamethrower. "Earplugs are on the desk if you need them," she'd add, winking. Michael, of course, did need them, desperately. Their first major showdown came during a board meeting. Michael had rehearsed his quarterly report with surgical precision, every syllable timed to the second. Charlotte, however, had decided it was engagement day. She handed out stress balls. "For your hands, sir." Proposed a mid-meeting icebreaker, 2 truths and a lie. and even attempted to get the directors to stand in a circle of trust. Michael intervened before the circle could form. "This is a business meeting, not a therapy session," he snapped, slamming his laptop shut. Charlotte merely smiled. "Well, they say happiness is the ultimate productivity hack." The tension wasn't just professional, it was elemental. Michael's world was black and white balance sheets, Charlotte's was watercolor mood boards and Monday motivation memes. When he barked, "I need that report by noon," she'd reply, "Can I add some gifts for visual flair?" When he demanded a cost-cutting analysis, she'd counter with, "What if we invest in team morale instead? Free pizza could save the company." Michael would grit his teeth. "You're paid to execute, not philosophize." Yet the cracks in his armor were microscopic but undeniable. He'd catch himself watching her laugh with the interns sactually laughing instead of billing hours. He'd noticed the way the office hummed when she was around, like a hive energized by her pollen. And when she left on Fridays, calling over her shoulder, "Have a great weekend, even you, Grumpy." He'd stare at his empty coffee mug decaf, damn it, and wonder, was a little chaos really so dangerous? By Thursday, the push and pull had become a rhythm. Michael would bark, Charlotte would bounce back. He'd demand spreadsheets, she'd deliver them with a side of dad jokes. The office, once a morgue of muted tones and muted souls, now buzzed with a strange aliveness. It was irritating, disruptive, and not entirely unpleasant. Michael Turner, the human ice pick, was thawing, just a tiny bit, Charlotte's modus operandi was nothing short of witchcraft, at least. That's what Michael muttered under his breath as she transformed the office into a carnival of cheer. Monday mornings, previously a graveyard of collective dread, were now greeted with Motivation Mondays. Charlotte would pin a new inspirational quote on the bulletin board each week: "Dare to sparkle," or "Coffee first, world domination later," and leave. Fortune cookies in everyone's inboxes. The cookies were terrible, but the smiles they sparked, priceless. She hijacked the break room, swapping the stale coffee for a rainbow of tea varieties: chamomile for stress, peppermint for focus, and adding a gratitude jar where employees could scribble what they were thankful for. Michael found a note in there once: "I'm grateful for Charlotte's weirdness. It's like a virus, but good." He'd crumpled it, then smoothed it out, and then kept it. The turning point came during a brutal deadline sprint. The team was drowning in spreadsheets and stress, eyes bloodshot and tempers fraying. Charlotte appeared. With a rogue karaoke machine, I borrowed it from a garage sale and launched into a rendition of "Don't Stop Believin'." At first, there were groans, then eye rolls. Then, against all logic, Ryan from IT joined in. Soon the entire floor was harmonizing. Michael included, though he'd deny it till his grave. The project was delivered on time, and for the first time in years, Michael noticed something odd: people were staying past 5 p.m. voluntarily. It wasn't just the antics. It was the way Charlotte remembered everything: the birthday of intern Emily's dog, the fact that Mark in logistics hated pineapples on pizza, that Michael preferred his coffee exactly 140 degrees. "I bought a thermometer," she'd proudly declared when he'd griped about a cold cup. She turned trivial details into golden threads of connection. By Friday, the office was a different beast. Laughter leaked from cubicles. High fives replaced stiff nods. Even old Mr. Henderson from legal, who'd once threatened to sue a potted plant for emotional distress, was caught sharing a joke. Michael, meanwhile, was caught doing something far more alarming. He'd laughed. Not a chuckle, a full, booming laugh that made Charlotte grin like she'd won the lottery. And maybe, in a way, she had. At first, Michael's irritation was a storm cloud that refused to dissipate. Charlotte's chirpy good mornings were a dagger to his coffee-deprived skull. Her habit of leaving sticky notes, "You've got this," or "Smile, you're doing great," on his keyboard felt like an invasion. One morning, he'd arrived. to find his monitor adorned with a cartoon drawing of a CEO with a cape, labeled Michael Savior of Spreadsheets. He'd almost fired her, almost, but then came the erosion. It started with the tiniest fissures, like the time he'd stayed late to finish a merger proposal and found Charlotte still there, organizing the supply closet. "Why aren't you gone?" he'd snapped. "It's 9 p.m. Shed shrugged, her ponytail swinging as she hung a new plant jade for prosperity on a cubicle. "Someone's got to make sure the highlighters don't rebel." He'd huffed, but when she'd left humming, he'd noticed the plant was strategically placed near David's desk, who'd been demoted last quarter. The contagion spread. Michael found himself, against all reason, adding a PS thanks to an email to Charlotte. Then during a conference call with hecklers from Berlin, he'd actually laughed at one of her dad jokes, scrawled on a post-it, "Why don't skeletons fight each other? They don't have the guts." The Germans had hung up confused, but Michael? He'd almost smiled. Worst of all was the team meeting, where Charlotte presented her Office Olympics paperclip curling, spreadsheet Sudoku, the infamous stapler javelin. Michael had vetoed it until he saw the look on intern Emily's face, wide-eyed, hopeful. Fine. 1 hour, only because morale metrics demand it. By the end, he was judging the stapler throw with a straight face. The team roared with laughter, and Charlotte gave him a thumbs-up, had pretended not to see. By Thursday, the ice around Michael's heart had cracked enough to let in slivers of sunlight. He still loathed the karaoke machine, still hated the decaf. But when Charlotte bounded in on Friday, announcing its national Wear Your Michael's World had always been about the big picture, the million-dollar deals, the boardroom showdowns, the relentless climb. Charlotte, however, was obsessed with the footnotes. On Wednesday, he found her perched by the office window during a rare lull, her face tilted toward the sun, like she was absorbing its secrets. "What are you doing?" he'd barked, tie loosened from the day's heat. "Soaking up the vitamin D," she'd replied, not looking away. "Did you know sunlight boosts serotonin? It's like nature's Prozac." He'd scoffed, but noticed later, as he packed up to leave, that she'd left the blinds open, a small rebellion against his fluorescent kingdom. The laughter was another thing. It started with the interns, tittering over her dad jokes scrawled on post-its, "Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything." Soon it spread like wildfire, Ryan from IT snorting over a Motivation Monday meme, Sarah in accounting doubling. Over when Charlotte accidentally spilled glitter on a spreadsheet. "It's a sparkly audit." Michael would glare, but the damage was done. The office, once a mausoleum of hushed whispers, was now a symphony of chuckles, and damn it, even he felt the corners of his mouth twitching more often. As for the small victories, Charlotte had turned them into a sport. She celebrated Mark's on-time deliveries with high fives and a logistics hero badge, a foam finger she'd bought at a garage sale. She threw confetti when Emily aced her first big presentation, champagne taste, budget-friendly thrills. Michael had caught her one evening, meticulously logging these moments into a spreadsheet of her own. January 12th. Michael didn't shout at me. Miracle alert. She'd laughed when he questioned her methods. Someone's got to keep track of the good stuff. Otherwise, how do we know we're winning? By Thursday, Michael found himself doing the unthinkable noticing. The way the afternoon sun hit Charlotte's desk, casting everything in gold. The way the office collectively exhaled when she brought in cookies baked with love and a dash of chaos. The way she'd pause mid-task to dance when a song she liked played on her wireless speaker, always something obnoxiously cheerful, like "Don't Stop Me Now." He'd catch himself smirking, then schooled his face into its usual scowl. But the damage was done. She'd cracked his shell just enough to let in the light. That Friday, as Charlotte hummed while organizing the supply closet, its therapeutic swear, Michael did something unexpected. He added a star to her tiny triumph's horror note that read, "Implemented Charlotte's Friday fun hour. Productivity up 12, miracles happen." Shed grinned, all dimples and sunshine. "See, boss, joy isn't just for slackers." He'd almost rolled his eyes, but instead found himself thinking, what if she's right? What if the real legacy isn't in the spreadsheets, but in the moments between them? Michael's curiosity, once a tightly coiled spring, began to unwind like a slow leak. It started with the innocuous, "Why do you collect those silly mugs?" To which she'd reply, "Each one tells a story." That dinosaur mug. From the time I got lost in a theme park and found friendship instead. Her answers were always laced with warmth, never revealing too much, like a book that teases but doesn't spoil. The questions grew bolder. During a rare rainstorm that drowned the city in grey, he'd found her staring out the window, her reflection mingling with the droplets. "Why do you always look at the sky?" he'd asked, not unkindly. She'd turned, a smile playing on her lips. "Looking for rainbows, of course. You never know when joy might sneak in." It was the first time he'd seen her eyes glimmer with something unspoken, a hint of vulnerability she swiftly buried under a laugh. One afternoon, as she organized the now legendary gratitude jar, he'd leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "Why do you go out of your way for everyone but never talk about yourself?" The office fell silent, waiting for her response. Charlotte paused, her fingers brushing a note that read, "Grateful for Michael's secret soft side." She chuckled, a sound like wind chimes. "Because everyone deserves a little magic, even if they don't believe in it yet." Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. The breakthrough came during a team-building retreat, a nightmare of trust falls and rope courses that Michael had only attended to ensure Charlotte didn't embarrass him. As the group huddled around a campfire, roasting marshmallows, Charlotte had insisted on s'mores therapy. She shared a story about a childhood dog named Max, who taught her that love is about showing up, even on bad days. Her voice wavered for a split second before she rallied, passing the marshmallow skewer to Michael. "Your turn, boss. What's your secret sauce?" Ed fumbled, eventually leading to the revelation that Charlotte, ever the deflecting maestro, had an arsenal of stories, carefully curated to shield while engaging. Michael realized with a start that her deflections weren't evasions, they were invitations. By Friday, Michael's mind was a labyrinth of unanswered questions. Who was Charlotte Miller, really? Why did her optimism feel like a lifeline and a threat in equal measure? And why, when she left for the day, calling over her shoulder, "See you tomorrow, sunshine"? Did he feel a strange, unwelcome pull to know more? The answers would have to wait. For now, he had a spreadsheet to finish and a certain someone's Tuesday tidbits email to ignore, or so he told himself. The discovery happened on a Friday, of all days. Michael had arrived early, determined to finalize the merger documents before the weekend. The office was still shrouded in pre-dawn silence, the kind that makes every whisper echo. Charlotte's desk, usually a chaos of color, was eerily tidy. Too tidy. A folder lay open on her chair, its contents visible even from Michael's vantage point across the room. His curiosity, now a well-oiled machine, propelled him forward before logic could intervene. Inside the folder were medical reports, words like stage 4, inoperable, and prognosis jumping out like daggers. Michael's breath hitched. The MRI scans showed a tumor, a dark shadow claiming territory in her brain. His mind reeled. Charlotte, the woman who'd turned his office into a circus, who believed in rainbows and tiny triumphs, was dying. The thought was a punch to the gut, sharp and unexpected. He'd barely registered the sound of her keycard swiping. "Morning, boss," she chirped, flipping on the lights. The room flooded with brightness, but Michael felt like he was drowning. He turned, feigning nonchalance, as he tucked the folder behind his back. "What's this?" he asked, his voice steadier than his heart. Charlotte's smile faltered for a heartbeat, a fleeting slip of vulnerability, before she laughed, a sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. Just some old paperwork, nothing important. But her hands betrayed her, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. Michael's mind raced. He wanted to ask, needed to ask, but the words stuck. Instead, he nodded curtly and retreated to his office, the folder burning a hole in his pocket. That night, sleep evaded him. Images of Charlotte's laughter, her dances, the way she'd sparked life into his sterile world, played on repeat. The woman who'd taught him to see the sun was fading, and he didn't know what to do. By Monday, Michael's resolve had hardened. He'd research, he'd find answers. Because if there was one thing he excelled at, it was solving problems. And damn it, this was the biggest problem of his career. Michael's quest began in the sterile glow of the hospital's oncology department, his loafers echoing against the cold tile as he navigated the labyrinth of corridors. He'd hacked into Charlotte's failure feat that should have made him proud, given the firewalls, but instead left a bitter taste in his mouth. There, in clinical black and white, was her diagnosis: glioblastoma, stage 4, life expectancy 6 to 12 months. The words sat like a lead weight in his stomach. His next stop was the university's medical library, where he devoured journals, with titles like Emerging Treatments for Malignant Brain Tumors and the Role of Immunotherapy in Neuro-Oncology. He scribbled notes on a legal pad, his tie loosened and glasses smudged with wear. By midnight, he'd compiled a list of experimental trials, some in Zurich, others in Boston, all requiring travel, funds, and a fighter's spirit. Charlotte's spirit, he knew, was fierce. But time was a luxury she didn't have. On Tuesday, Michael intercepted Charlotte's mail, a crudely addressed envelope from a charity called Sunrise Wishes. Inside was a handwritten note: "Dear Charlotte, thank you for your donation. We're attaching a prepaid card for your bucket list fund. Use it to make memories. With love, the Sunrise family." The card had 500 on it. Michael's jaw tightened. 500 wouldn't cover a taxi ride to the nearest trial. He dug deeper, tracing her financials through shell accounts and automatic donations shed, set up for causes ranging from animal shelters to cancer research. The woman gave away more in a month than most did in a lifetime, yet her own bucket list, a crumpled paper he'd accidentally found in her trash-listed dreams, both grand and simple. See the northern lights, skydive, eat sushi in Tokyo, adopt a puppy, write a novel. Michael stared at the list, a strange impulse taking root. What if he could give her those moments? By Thursday, Michael had formulated a planar, secret architecture of generosity. He'd harness his resources, his connections, his very meticulousness to fulfill her list item by item, not out of pity, not exactly, more like penance. For every moment he'd snapped at her cheer, every time he'd dismissed her joy as frivolous, he'd no fight to make it real. The first step was simple: book a flight to Iceland for next week. The next, well, skydiving required a waiver and a helmet cam, for documentation, of course. Charlotte's world tilted on its axis when Michael strode into her office, a folder clutched in his hand like a shield. "We're flying to Iceland tomorrow," he announced, his tone brooking no argument. "Gear's on its way. Pack warm clothes." She gaped, her mind scrambling. "Is this about work?" Michael's lips twitched, the closest to a smile she'd seen in months. "Team building. Now go, before I change my mind." The trip was a blur of wonder. Michael, ever the planner, had arranged a Northern Lights tour, chartered flights, thermos flasks of hot cocoa, and a guide who spoke in hushed whispers about auroral storms. Charlotte had always imagined the lights as a myth, something poets invented to describe magic. But there she stood, wrapped in a fur-lined coat Michael had borrowed from the hotel, watching the sky dance in emerald and gold. "It's like the universe is throwing a party," she breathed. Michael, hands tucked into his pockets, felt something foreign-y, warmth that wasn't from the cocoa. Back at the office, the gestures continued. A skydiving certificate landed on her desk with a posted corporate courage training. Friday at dawn. Charlotte had screamed when the plane took off, but by the time they landed, she was whooping with laughter, her face flushed. "You look ridiculous." "In that jumpsuit?" Michael grumbled, though his own cheeks were pink. "You look human," she shot back, earning a rare, genuine smile. The most unexpected gift came weeks later, a wiry golden retriever puppy named Sunny deposited at her apartment, with a card for stress relief, approved by HR. Charlotte had texted Michael a photo of Sunny chewing on her shoes, captioned "Legacy of Light." His reply was a single thumbs-up emoji, but that night he'd lain awake wondering when exactly he'd become a man who bought puppies for his assistant. The pattern became a rhythm. Michael's corporate retreats took them to Tokyo, where Charlotte devoured sushi at a tiny counter while Michael sipped green tea, pretending not to watch her face light up with each bite. "This is life-changing," she'd whispered, and he'd muttered, "It's just fish," but his eyes betrayed him. Then there was the surprise reunion he'd orchestrated with her estranged sister, Emma, lunch at a downtown bistro where Charlotte had sobbed into her salad, thanking Michael through teary giggles. "You didn't have to do this," she'd said, but he'd cut her off. "It's in the job description now. Emotional support falls under additional duties." The grandest gesture was the concert tickets' front row seats to her favorite band, a group Michael had previously dismissed as background noise with drums. He'd stood awkwardly by the stage, arms crossed, while Charlotte sang along, her voice a raw, beautiful thing. When she'd turned to him afterward, eyes shining, and said, "This was my dream," Michael had felt something shift a crack in his armor he couldn't ignore. By the 6th month, Charlotte's bucket list was half-checked, and the office had become a living testament to their unlikely bond. Michael's desk now boasted a photo of them skydiving, Sunny's paw prints on the coffee table, and a sticky note that read, "You're secretly a good guy, don't me." He'd rolled his eyes, but kept it pinned there. The man who once measured success in spreadsheets was now counting moments and finding them infinitely more valuable. The trust between them bloomed like a flower after rain. During a midnight flight to Paris for a spontaneous art exhibit Charlotte had always wanted to see, Michael had finally asked the question that had haunted him for months. "Why do you keep giving away everything you have?" The plane's hum filled the silence as Charlotte turned to him, her eyes reflecting the cabin lights. "Because love is a verb," she said softly. "It's not about having, it's about sharing. And you," she added with a grin, "are surprisingly good at sharing for a CEO." Michael had scoffed, but the words landed like seeds. Over dinners in foreign cities and shared laughs in strangers' taxis, he'd begun to see Charlotte not just as his assistant, but as someone who understood him in ways no one ever had. When she'd fallen ill during a trip to the Grand Canyon, a feverish collapse that had him sprinting for a first aid kit, held her head in his lap, his voice trembling as he called for help. "Don't you dare leave me here," he'd growled, though the threat was empty. In that moment, the mask of professionalism slipped, revealing a man who cared far more than he'd ever admit. By the autumn, their dynamic had transformed. Michael would seek her opinion on merger strategies, valuing her outsider perspective. Charlotte, in turn, had become his confidante, a role no one else dared fill. One evening, as they lingered on a balcony overlooking Tokyo's neon glow, she'd turned to him. "You know, for a guy who hates surprises, you're pretty good at them." He'd pretended to scowl. "It's all about logistics." But his hand had brushed hers, a fleeting touch that spoke volumes. The revelation came during a chaotic Monday when Charlotte, frazzled by back-to-back meetings, stumbled into Michael's office. "I need to talk to you," she said, closing the door behind her. Michael braced for a complaint, another vendor delay, perhaps, but what she said next froze him. "I know you've been helping with my bucket list." Her voice was steady, but her eyes gave her a way-wide, vulnerable, searching. He stalled. "I don't know what you're talking about." She stepped closer, her hands clasped in front of her. "The flights, the concerts, Sunny, the timing's too perfect. And then there's this." She pulled out her phone, displaying a photo of Michael's assistant badge on the skydiving waiver. His heart sank. "You went through my things?" She shook her head, softening. "I didn't need to. You're the only person I know who'd micromanage a joyride." The air between them crackled. Michael opened his mouth to apologize, but Charlotte cut him off. I'm not upset. I'm grateful, more than you'll ever know." She reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve, a gesture that shattered his composure. "Why?" he asked, the word escaping. Raw and unfiltered. "Why go to all this trouble for someone who's leaving?" Her answer was a whisper. "Because you showed me how to live fully while I still can, and I wanted to give you a chance to live too." That evening, they sat in Michael's penthouse apartmenta space, as sterile as his former self, surrounded by the remnants of their latest adventure, Parisian postcards, a bottle of wine half empty, and Sunny sprawled on the rug. Charlotte spoke with a candor that stripped away the office pretenses. "I used to be terrified of the dark," she admitted, tracing the stem of her glass. Not the literal kind, but the idea of fading away without leaving a mark. What if I'm forgotten? Michael listened, his usual defenses dismantled by the rawness of her words. "What changed?" he asked, voice barely above a murmur. She smiled, a fleeting, thing you did. You taught me that legacies aren't just about buildings or deals. They're about moments, like the first time you laughed at one of my jokes, or when you let Sunny sit on your lap." Michael's throat tightened. "I didn't do anything special." "You let me see," she corrected. "You let me show you that joy isn't a distraction. It's the point." As the night deepened, Charlotte shared more, the novel she'd been writing in secret, her dream of starting a non-profit for terminally ill patients, her fear of never experiencing enough. Michael, in turn, spoke of his own buried dreams, the art school he'd abandoned, the father he'd never known, the lifetime spent armored against emotion. By dawn, the wine was gone, the words were spent, and the space between them had transformed. They weren't boss and assistant anymore. They were two people, raw and real, bound by a bond neither fully understood. The epiphany struck Michael like a lightning bolt during a rare moment of solitude. He'd been reviewing merger documents, a task that once soothed him when a photo on his desk caught his eye, Charlotte mid-laugh, Sunny at her feet, the sun gilding her hair like a halo. His chest tightened. This wasn't professional admiration or even gratitude. It was something fiercer, deeper, a realization that gutted him with its clarity. He'd loved her. Not the curated version she presented to the office, but the messy, vibrant woman who'd taught him to see the world in technicolor. The one who'd coaxed laughter from his stone-cold heart and built a bridge between his icy exterior and the warmth he'd buried for decades. And now, with her time slipping away, he was paralyzed by the fear of being too late. That night, he'd done something unprecedented. Head knocked on her apartment door at 2 a.m., clutching a bottle of single-malt whiskey and a manuscript wrapped in a leather cover. "It's your novel," he'd said, thrusting it at her. "I had it typed and edited, read it." She had stared at him wide-eyed as he continued. "And we're going to publish it. Next week." No arguments. The whiskey remained unopened as she pulled him inside, her. "And touch electric." "Michael," she whispered, "what are you doing?" He'd kissed her then, a kiss that said everything words couldn't. When they pulled apart, breathless, she'd laughed through her tears. "You're terrible at romance." He'd smirked, him learning. The office fell silent when Charlotte didn't arrive on Monday. Michael stood at her empty desk, Sunny whimpering at his feet, and addressed the staff with a gravity that stunned them all. "We're making changes," he announced, his voice steady but edged with something new, vulnerability. The rigid hierarchy would loosen. Mental health days would be mandatory. And every Friday, the company would host a Joy Hura space for connection, creativity, and yes, even dancing. Charlotte's influence seeped into every corner. Her desk became a memorial of sorts, adorned with postcards from the Adventures Shed. Inspired skydiving certificates, concert tickets, photos of Sunny with employees. Michael, once the embodiment of corporate austerity, now kept a small plant on his windowsill. For vitamin D, he'd mutter when teased and occasionally surprised the team with pizza because someone forgot to budget for morale. The most profound change was the Charlotte Miller Funda non-profit he'd launched in her name, providing grants for terminally ill patients to fulfill their bucket lists. At the inaugural gala, Michael took the stage, his tie loosened and his eyes glistening. Charlotte taught us that joy isn't selfish, it's necessary, he'd said, his voice steadier than he felt. She showed us that love with a deadline is still love, and today we carry her light forward. Months later, the office buzzed with a new energy, a symphony of laughter, collaboration, and the occasional impromptu dance party. Newcomers noticed Michael's quirks first, the way he'd pause by the window to watch the sunset, the cookies he'd leave in the break room for emergencies, the way he'd high-five interns without irony. One Friday afternoon, as the team gathered for Joy Hour, Michael stood at Charlotte's old desk, a small stack of grant applications in hand. "Next up," he announced with a grin, "skydiving lessons for Mark from logistics. His dream's been pending for 3 months." The room erupted in cheers as Mark turned scarlet. "Thanks, boss," he stammered, "but I'm not sure about the whole jumping out of a plane thing." Michael just laughed a real, unguarded laugh and clapped him on the back. "Consider it your office with heart moment." Sunny, now a gentle office guardian, trotted over and nudged Michael's hand. He obliged, scratching the dog's ears as he scanned the room. Charlotte's legacy wasn't in the marble lobby or the stock price, it was here, in the way Sarah in accounting helped Ryan debug his code without prompting, in the way the new HR head emphasized kindness that lasts during onboarding, in the way Michael himself now measured success not just in spreadsheets, but in smiles. She had rewritten the script, and in doing so had given him the greatest gift of all, a life lived fully, even in her absence. As the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the office in gold, Michael allowed himself a rare indulgence. He hummed Charlotte's favorite tune. The team joined in, a chorus that harmonized with the city's rhythm. Somewhere, he imagined her laughing, dancing in the light shed left behind. And for the first time in decades, Michael Turner felt truly alive. As we close this chapter of Michael and Charlotte's journey, we're left with a heart that's been forever altered. Michael, once the Ice King of corporate America, now measures success not just in quarterly reports, but in the laughter echoing through his office and the way sunlight dances on his windowsill. Charlotte's legacy isn't etched in marble or stock prices. It's in every act of kindness Michael now champions, every joy hour that transforms Fridays into celebrations, and every grant awarded through the Charlotte Miller Fund. Her life, though brief, was lived fully, teaching us that love with a deadline is still love worth fighting for. Now we want to hear from you. What moment in Michael and Charlotte's story resonated deepest? Did you see the twist coming, or did it leave you as breathless as a first kiss? Share with us the ways you've chosen to live fully in your own bucket. List journey, and don't forget to hit that like button if this tale warmed your heart even a little. Drop a comment below with your thoughts, subscribe for more stories that make you feel, and remember, joy isn't just for the bold. It's for everyone, willing to let the sunshine in.